The stagecoach rattled to a halt, sending dust spiraling into the warm New Mexico air as Winifred Wheeler clutched her small valise and peered through the window at the town of Aztec. After 3 weeks of grueling travel from Boston, she had finally arrived at her destination, ready to meet the man she was to marry, a rancher named Frederick Thompson, who had placed an advertisement for a bride in the Eastern newspapers 6 months prior. "Aztec, madam," the driver called as he opened the door and offered his hand. End of the line. Winifred stepped carefully onto the wooden platform of the stagecoach station, her legs stiff from the long journey. At 22 years old, she had left behind everything she knew: her position as a schoolteacher, her modest boarding house room, and the few friends she had made since becoming an orphan at 16. The letters exchanged with Frederick had given her hope for a new beginning in this wild territory. The sun beat down mercilessly as Winifred smoothed her navy blue traveling dress and adjusted her small bonnet. Aztec was smaller than she had imagined, a single dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. Men in cowboy hats and women in practical frontier attire moved about their business, occasionally glancing curiously at the newcomer. "Miss Wheeler." A solemn-looking older man approached, hat in hand. "I'm Sheriff James Harkins." "Yes, I'm Winifred Wheeler," she replied with a smile. "I'm here to meet Mr. Frederick Thompson. Could you direct me to his ranch?" The sheriff's weathered face fell, and Winifred felt her heart drop before he even spoke. "I'm afraid I have some terrible news, Miss Wheeler. Mr. Thompson passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick-like." The words struck Winifred like physical blows. 3 weeks ago, just as she had begun her journey west. "But I received no telegram, no word at all." "We sent word to Boston, to the address he had in his papers," Sheriff Harkins explained apologetically. "Must not have reached you before you departed." Winifred swayed slightly, and the sheriff reached out to steady her. 3,000 miles from home, with barely $20 to her name, and the future she had carefully planned now lay in ruins. Is there perhaps a hotel where I might stay until I can make arrangements to return east?" she asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "There's Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house," the sheriff offered, "but I'm afraid the next eastbound stage doesn't come through for 2 weeks. As they spoke, a tall figure approached from across the street. The man moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to the harsh frontier. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but Winifred could see he was younger than the sheriff, perhaps in his early 30s. His clothes were dusty, but well kept, a sign of a man who took pride in his appearance despite the rugged lifestyle. "Sheriff." The newcomer nodded in greeting, his voice deep and resonant. As he turned toward Winifred, she was struck by the intensity of his blue eyes, which contrasted with his sun-bronzed skin. "Ah, Mr. Anderson," Sheriff Harkins said. "This here is Miss Wheeler. She's come all the way from Boston to marry Frederick Thompson." The man's expression softened with understanding. "Owen Anderson," he introduced himself, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair. "I own the ranch neighboring Thompson's place. I'm mighty sorry about your situation, Miss Wheeler." "Thank you, Mr. Anderson," Winifred replied softly. Owen Anderson studied her for a moment, seeming to take in her city clothes, delicate appearance, and the single small valise that contained all her worldly possessions. Then he glanced at the darkening sky. "Sheriff, there's a storm brewing. Mrs. Abernathy's place is full up with those cattle buyers from Santa Fe." He turned back to Winifred. "Miss Wheeler, I don't mean to be forward, but Thompson's house sits empty, and it's rightfully yours by way of the arrangement you had. My sister Abigail is staying at my ranch. If you'd allow, I could escort you to Thompson's place and have Abigail come over to stay with you until you decide what you want to do next." Sheriff Harkins nodded approvingly. "That's right decent of you, Anderson. Thompson did leave everything to his intended." Winifred hesitated, weighing her limited options. The prospect of staying alone in a dead man's house was unsettling, but the presence of another woman would make it proper. And the fact remained that she had nowhere else to go. "That's very kind, Mr. Anderson. I would appreciate the escort, and your sister's company would be most welcome." Owen nodded and picked up her valise. "My wagon's just down the street. We should get moving if we want to beat the rain." The ride to Frederick Thompson's ranch was mostly silent. Winifred sat rigidly beside Owen Anderson on the wagon bench, lost in thought as they traveled the 5 miles outside of town. Dark clouds gathered above, and the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. "It's just over this ridge," Owen finally said, breaking the silence. "Thompson's place, your place now, is a good parcel. Not as big as some, but the house is solid, and there's about 30 head of cattle." As they crested the hill, Winifred got her first glimpse of what was to have been her new home. A modest but well-built cabin stood in a clearing with a small barn and corral nearby. The land stretched out behind it, bordered by a creek and hills covered in pine and juniper. "It's lovely," she whispered, emotion catching in her throat. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. "Let me check inside first," he said, jumping down and offering his hand to help her descend. Winifred watched as he entered the cabin, emerging a few minutes later. "It's tidy enough," he reported. "Thompson wasn't one for fancy things, but it's clean. I've been checking on the place since. Well, since he passed. Didn't seem right to let it fall to ruin." "Thank you for that kindness," Winifred said, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as Owen carried her valise inside. The cabin was simple, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth. A door led to what Winifred assumed was the bedroom. "I'll get a fire going for you," Owen offered, moving efficiently to stack kindling in the fireplace. "Then I'll ride over to my place and fetch Abigail. It's just a mile west of here." As he worked, Winifred removed her bonnet and gloves, looking around at what should have been her marital home. On the mantel stood a daguerreotype of a bearded man with kind eyes. Frederick Thompson, she presumed. Next to it sat an unopened letter addressed in her handwriting, her final correspondence that he never had the chance to read. "Mr. Anderson," she said suddenly, "may I ask what sort of man was Frederick Thompson?" Owen paused in his work, straightening to his full height. "He was a good man. Quiet, hard-working. Kept to himself mostly, but was always ready to help a neighbor. Been out here about 10 years, came from Pennsylvania originally." He hesitated. "He spoke of you often after your correspondence began. Said he was fortunate to have found a lady of education and refinement willing to take a chance on a rough frontier man." Tears welled in Winifred's eyes, and she turned away quickly to hide them. She had never met Frederick Thompson, had known him only through their exchanged letters, yet she mourned the loss of the future they might have built together. "The fire's caught," Owen said gently. "There's coffee and basic provisions in the kitchen. I'll be back with Abigail before dark." "Thank you, Mr. Anderson," Winifred replied, composing herself. "I don't know what I would have done without your kindness today." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, compassion, perhaps, or understanding. "Out here we look after our neighbors, Miss Wheeler. It's how we survive." With a nod, he replaced his hat and stepped out into the increasingly heavy rain. Alone in the cabin, Winifred sank into the rocking chair and finally allowed herself to weep for Frederick Thompson, for her lost future, and for her own uncertain fate in this wild, unfamiliar land. The rain was falling in sheets when Winifred heard the approach of hoofbeats. Rising from the rocking chair where she had spent the last hour coming to terms with her situation, she moved to the window and peered out. Through the gray curtain of rain, she saw Owen Anderson dismounting from his horse, helping a woman down from another mount. They hurried toward the cabin, hunched against the downpour. Winifred hastily wiped her tear-stained face and opened the door to admit them. "Miss Wheeler," Owen said, removing his dripping hat. "This is my sister, Abigail Anderson." Abigail was a sturdy young woman of perhaps 25, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother, though her hair was a shade lighter. She wore practical clothes, a split riding skirt and jacket, and carried a small bundle. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Wheeler, though I'm mighty sorry about the circumstances," Abigail said warmly, setting down her bundle. "Owen told me everything. I've brought some fresh bread and stew I had simmering, figured you might be hungry after your journey." "That's very thoughtful, thank you," Winifred replied, touched by the gesture. "Please call me Winifred." "And I'm Abby to my friends," the other woman smiled. She turned to her brother. "You're soaked through, Owen. You ought to get back before this storm worsens." Owen nodded, but hesitated at the door. "I've got to check on my cattle tomorrow, but I'll stop by on my way back to town. There's some business matters regarding Thompson's property we should discuss." His eyes met Winifred's. "Will you be all right here tonight?" "Yes, thank you," Winifred assured him. "You've done more than enough already." With a nod, Owen departed back into the storm, and Winifred found herself watching his retreating figure with an unexpected pang of regret. "My brother's always been the responsible sort," Abby commented, already bustling about the kitchen area, setting out the food she'd brought. "Ever since our parents died in '58, he's taken care of everyone around him." "He seems very kind," Winifred replied, moving to help her new companion. "The kindest," Abby agreed. "Too kind for his own good sometimes. Now, come sit and eat something. You look like you're about to collapse, and no wonder after the day you've had." Over a simple but delicious meal of beef stew and freshly baked bread, the two women began to get acquainted. Abby explained that she normally lived in Santa Fe with her husband, a clerk in the territorial government offices, but was visiting her brother for a month while her husband was away on business in Denver. "And what about you?" Abby asked gently. "If you don't mind my asking, what brought you all the way from Boston to marry a man you'd never met?" Winifred stared into her cup of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "I was a school teacher there, but my parents died when I was 16, leaving me with no family and very little money. I lived in a boarding house, taught at the school, but—" She hesitated. "Boston has many more women than men, and at 22 I was already considered firmly on the shelf. When I saw Mr. Thompson's advertisement, his letters seemed so sincere, so kind. And now you're here with no groom and 3,000 miles from home," Abby finished for her. "What will you do?" It was the question Winifred had been asking herself since receiving the news of Frederick's death. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have barely enough money for a ticket back east, but what would I return to? My teaching position has been filled, my room at the boarding house given to another." Abby reached across the table to squeeze Winifred's hand. "You don't have to decide tonight. Rest, gather your wits about you. The property is legally yours now. Frederick made that clear in his will. You could sell it and use the money for a fresh start, or, Winifred prompted. "Or you could stay," Abby said simply. "Aztec needs a school teacher. The children are learning their letters from Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, but she's expecting her 4th child and would welcome the relief." The idea took root in Winifred's mind. Stay here in this wild territory. It seemed simultaneously terrifying and strangely appealing. "I wouldn't know the first thing about running a ranch," she said. "Owen could help with that," Abby replied, then smiled at Winifred's expression. "Not like that, I mean he could advise you, help you hire a reliable hand or two. He's already been keeping an eye on Thompson's cattle since the funeral." That night, as Winifred lay in what should have been her marriage bed, listening to the rain drumming on the roof and Abby's soft breathing from the pallet she'd made near the hearth, she considered her options. The idea of staying, of building a life here in this beautiful, harsh country, was taking hold in her imagination. And unbidden, the image of Owen Anderson's kind blue eyes came to mind as she drifted off to sleep. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of possibility. Winifred woke to the smell of coffee and found Abby already up, cooking breakfast over the fire. "I hope you don't mind," Abby said cheerfully. "I found eggs in the henhouse out back. The chickens are hungry, they haven't been tended properly since Frederick fell ill." "I should learn how to care for them," Winifred said, surprising herself with the decision forming in her mind. Abby's eyes brightened. "Does that mean you're considering staying?" "I think I might," Winifred admitted. "At least for a while. I have nowhere else to go, and this land is now my responsibility." After breakfast, Abby took Winifred on a tour of the property. The henhouse held a dozen chickens, the barn housed 2 horses and a milk cow, and the small corral contained a friendly mule. Behind the house was a vegetable garden, overgrown but salvageable. Frederick was proud of this garden, Abby explained as they picked their way through the tangled growth. Said he wanted it nice for his bride. Winifred knelt and pulled a weed, emotion tightening her throat. This man she had never met had been preparing a home for her, thinking of her comfort. They were inspecting the root cellar when the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced a visitor. Emerging into the sunshine, they saw Owen dismounting from his horse. He'd clearly been working since dawn, his clothes were dusty, and he moved with the slight stiffness of a man who had been in the saddle for hours. "Ladies," he greeted them, removing his hat. "I hope you passed a comfortable night." "Very much so," Winifred replied. "Mr. Anderson, I want to thank you again for your kindness yesterday. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "I'm glad I could help," Owen said simply. He hesitated, then continued, "I've been checking Thompson's cattle. They're all accounted for, grazing in the north pasture. But there's the matter of running the ranch. Thompson employed a hand, Miguel Sanchez, who's been staying in town since the funeral. He's a good worker, knows the property well." "Mr. Anderson," Winifred interrupted, gathering her courage, "I've decided to stay, at least for now. I would appreciate any advice you could offer about managing the ranch." Surprise flickered across Owen's features, followed by something that might have been admiration. "That's a big decision, Miss Wheeler. Ranching isn't easy, especially for someone not raised to it." "I'm aware," she acknowledged, "but I'm willing to learn, and perhaps I could supplement my income by teaching. Abby mentioned that Aztec is in need of a school teacher." Owen glanced at his sister, who smiled innocently. "That's true enough," he agreed. "If you're set on staying, I'll help however I can. First thing would be to rehire Miguel. He's trustworthy and knows the cattle. I can ride into town today and send word to him." "I would appreciate that," Winifred said. "I'll draw up a list of what needs doing around here," Owen continued, warming to the task. "The fence on the east side needs mending before winter, and you'll want to bring in hay for the animals." As he spoke, Winifred watched him, struck by his natural authority and genuine desire to help. She found herself wondering about this man who had so readily come to her aid. "Mr. Anderson," she ventured when he paused, "you mentioned your parents passed away. Have you been in New Mexico territory long?" "Since '55, he replied. Our father brought us west from Missouri when I was 16. He built the ranch where I live now, and when he and our mother died of fever, I took it over." A shadow crossed his face. "It was hard going at first, but neighbors helped, including Frederick Thompson. I'm just returning the favor now." Winifred nodded, understanding better now his impulse to assist her. "Well, I'm grateful, and I promise I won't impose on your kindness indefinitely." A small smile curved Owen's lips. "It's no imposition, Miss Wheeler. Like I said yesterday, out here, neighbors look after each other." The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Winifred began adapting to her new life. Miguel Sanchez, a quiet, capable Mexican man in his 40s, returned to work the ranch, bringing his nephew Rafael to help with the heavier tasks. Miguel lived in a small cabin near the barn, while Rafael returned to his family in town each night. Abby stayed with Winifred, teaching her the basics of running a frontier household: how to manage the fire, cook on a wood stove, preserve food, and tend the chickens and garden. Winifred proved a quick learner, her determination to succeed overcoming her initial ignorance of such tasks. Owen came by daily, ostensibly to check on the cattle and advise Miguel, but he always found time to inquire about Winifred's welfare. Each visit, he seemed to linger a bit longer, sometimes staying to share the evening meal. A week after her arrival, Winifred rode into Aztec with Owen to meet with Sheriff Harkins, who was handling the legal aspects of Frederick Thompson's estate. "It's all straightforward," the sheriff explained as they sat in his office. "Thompson's will leaves everything to his intended bride, that's you, Miss Wheeler. The ranch, the cattle, the house, and all its contents. About the only thing you need to do is sign these papers to make it official." Winifred stared at the documents before her. "It feels wrong somehow," she admitted. "I never even met the man." "Thompson had no family," Sheriff Harkins said gently. "He wanted someone to have the fruits of his labor, someone who would appreciate what he built. From what I can see, you're doing just that." With a deep breath, Winifred signed the papers, officially becoming the owner of the Thompson Ranch. Afterward, Owen introduced her to Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, who was visibly relieved at the prospect of having a trained teacher take over the education of Aztec's children. "We have 14 children of school age," Mrs. Peterson explained, cradling her swollen belly. "We've been using the back room of the church for lessons, but it's hardly ideal. The town council has talked of building a proper schoolhouse, but nothing's come of it yet." "I would be happy to teach wherever space is available," Winifred assured her. "When would you like me to start?" "Monday next would be wonderful," Mrs. Peterson said gratefully. "I can introduce you to the children and show you what materials we have." As they left the church, Owen suggested they visit the general store. "You'll need supplies," he explained, "and it's time you met more of your neighbors." The general store was the social center of Aztec, and news of Winifred's arrival and decision to stay had clearly spread. As Owen introduced her around, she was met with curious but friendly faces. Mrs. Johnson, the storekeeper's wife, was particularly welcoming. "We've been needing a proper teacher," she said approvingly. "And it's high time Thompson's place had a woman's touch." By the time they headed back to the ranch, Winifred's wagon was loaded with supplies, and she had received invitations to Sunday services, a quilting circle, and a community dance planned for the following month. "Everyone seems very kind," she remarked as they drove out of town. "They're good people," Owen agreed. "Hard-working, honest folk who look out for each other." He glanced at her. "They like you already." "How can they? They hardly know me." "They know enough," Owen said simply. "They see a woman who didn't turn tail and run when faced with misfortune, who's willing to work hard and contribute to the community. That counts for a lot out here." Winifred felt warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I've lost my mind choosing to stay." Owen's expression grew serious. "You regret it?" "No," she realized, surprised by the certainty of her answer. "No, I don't." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the late September sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Finally, Owen spoke again. "There's a matter I've been meaning to discuss with you," he said, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your safety." "My safety?" "Yes, it's not proper for a young woman to live alone, even with Miguel on the property. Abby can't stay forever. Her husband expects her back in Santa Fe by the end of October." "I had been thinking about that," Winifred admitted. "Perhaps I could find another woman in town willing to board with me." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "That might work, but there's another concern. Winter's coming, and with it, the possibility of outlaws." "Outlaws," Winifred repeated, alarmed. "Most years we get drifters coming through, men looking for easy pickings before the snow flies. A ranch run by a woman alone might be seen as an inviting target." Winifred hadn't considered this aspect of frontier life. "What would you suggest?" Owen seemed to choose his words carefully. "I could ride over more regularly, check on things, and," he hesitated, "I want you to learn to shoot." "Shoot a gun?" "Yes, a gun," Owen confirmed, a hint of amusement in his voice at her obvious shock. "Every woman out here knows how to handle a firearm. It's a necessity, not a choice." Winifred tried to imagine herself wielding a pistol or rifle and found the image both terrifying and strangely empowering. "I suppose you're right," she conceded, "though I've never so much as touched a gun in my life." "We'll start tomorrow," Owen decided. "There's an old Walker Colt of my father's that would suit you, small enough to handle easily but with enough stopping power to do the job." Winifred nodded, once again struck by how completely her life had changed in the span of a week. From Boston schoolteacher to New Mexico rancher and gun owner, it was almost too much to comprehend. As promised, the next day Owen arrived with the Colt revolver, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth. Abby insisted on watching the lesson, clearly amused by Winifred's nervous approach to the weapon. "It won't bite you," she teased as Winifred gingerly accepted the gun from Owen. "It might do worse than bite," Winifred replied, acutely aware of the deadly potential in her hands. Owen was a patient teacher. He explained each part of the revolver, demonstrated how to load and clean it, and emphasized the importance of treating every gun as if it were loaded. "Never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot," he instructed seriously. "And keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire." They set up targets, empty bottles, on a fence post behind the barn, well away from the animals and house. Winifred's first attempts were dismal. The gun's recoil startled her, sending her shots wild, and the noise made her flinch each time. "You need to relax your arm slightly," Owen advised, stepping close behind her. His hands gently adjusted her stance, one at her waist, the other guiding her extended arm. "Don't lock your elbow. And breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it." Intensely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his body just inches from her back, Winifred tried to focus on the target. She exhaled slowly and pulled the trigger. The bottle shattered satisfyingly. "I did it," she exclaimed, turning to face Owen with a triumphant smile. Suddenly aware of how close they stood, her smile faltered and she saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, followed by something warmer that made her heart beat faster. Abby cleared her throat pointedly from where she watched nearby. "Good shot, Winifred. I think you're a natural." Owen stepped back, the moment broken. "A few more practice sessions and you'll be ready to defend your homestead," he agreed, his voice carefully neutral. The shooting lessons continued daily. and Winifred found herself looking forward to Owen's visits more than she cared to admit. There was something about his steady presence that brought a sense of security and, increasingly, a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with firearms training. By early October, Winifred had settled into a routine. Mornings were spent tending to household chores and helping Miguel with the lighter ranch work. Afternoons, she rode into town to teach school, returning before dusk to complete evening tasks. She was exhausted, but fulfilled in a way she had never experienced in Boston. The schoolchildren had accepted her readily, hungry for knowledge, and delighted by her Eastern accent and mannerisms. The townspeople, too, had welcomed her into their community, particularly after learning of her decision to remain and take up Frederick Thompson's legacy. One crisp October evening, as Winifred returned from town, she noticed smoke rising from her chimney and frowned. Abby had gone to visit friends in Farmington and wasn't expected back until the following day. Miguel always returned to his cabin after completing his work. Approaching cautiously, hand near the revolver she now wore at her waist when riding alone, Winifred dismounted and tied her horse to the hitching post. She crept toward the cabin door, heart pounding. "Hello," she called, pushing the door open slowly. Owen stood at her stove, stirring something in a pot that filled the cabin with a delicious aroma. He turned, smiling at her surprised expression. "Hope you don't mind," he said. "Thought you might appreciate a hot meal after your day in town." Winifred stood speechless in the doorway, struck by the domestic scene before her. Owen Anderson, tall, strong, capable Owen wearing an apron over his usual attire, cooking in her kitchen as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You cook?" she finally managed. He chuckled. "Don't sound so shocked. I've been fending for myself for years. Nothing fancy, mind you, just basic fare. Today it's venison stew, got a deer this morning and thought you might enjoy some fresh meat." "It smells wonderful," Winifred admitted, removing her coat and hat. "But you didn't have to do this." "Wanted to," Owen replied simply. "Besides, there's something I need to discuss with you." They ate at the small table, the stew indeed as delicious as it smelled. Owen explained that he had received word of cattle rustlers operating in the area. "The Carson brothers," he said grimly. "Mean bunch from down Texas way. They've hit 2 ranches south of here already." Fear prickled along Winifred's spine. "Do you think they'll come this far north?" "Can't say for certain, but I don't like taking chances." Owen's expression was serious. "I'd feel better if you weren't out here alone, especially with Abby gone to Farmington." "Miguel is just a shout away," Winifred pointed out. "Miguel is one man and not as young as he once was." Owen hesitated. "I'd like to stay here until Abby returns." "I can sleep in the barn or on a pallet by the fire." Propriety warred with practicality in Winifred's mind. Having an unmarried man stay overnight would certainly raise eyebrows if known in town. Yet the threat was real, and Owen's presence would be a deterrent to anyone with ill intentions. "The barn would be cold," she said finally. "A pallet by the fire would be more comfortable." Relief crossed Owen's features. "Thank you, I promise to be a gentleman." "I never doubted it," Winifred replied honestly. That night, as Owen settled on his makeshift bed near the hearth and Winifred retired to her room, she found herself acutely aware of his presence just beyond her door. It was both comforting and unsettling in ways she didn't fully understand, or perhaps understood all too well, but wasn't ready to acknowledge. In the morning, Winifred woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Owen had risen before dawn and prepared breakfast, feeding the animals and checking the property before she even stirred. "You didn't have to do all this," she protested as she joined him at the table. "Least I could do for imposing on your hospitality," he replied with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. Over breakfast, Owen brought up another matter that had been on his mind. "Winter's coming fast," he observed. "The cabin needs weatherproofing, chinking between the logs, banking around the foundation, and your woodpile needs to be 3 times what it is now." Miguel mentioned the wood, Winifred acknowledged. "He and Raphael plan to cut more next week." "Good, but there's the rest to consider. First snow often comes by early November in these parts." Owen hesitated. "I thought perhaps we might organize a work party, neighbors coming together to help prepare your place for winter. It's a common practice out here." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on anyone," Winifred said. Owen smiled. "It's not an imposition. Everyone helps each other, that's how it works. The Johnsons from town, the Petersons, the Mendoza family who ranch to the east, they'd all come. We'd make a day of it with food and maybe some music after. Consider it a proper welcome to the community." The idea was appealing, not just the practical help, but the chance to further integrate into this close-knit society. "If you're sure it wouldn't be an imposition, I'd be grateful for the assistance." "I'll spread the word in town today," Owen promised. "How about a week from Saturday?" That should give everyone time to plan. As Owen prepared to leave for his own ranch later that morning, Winifred walked him to his horse. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Owen studied her face for a long moment. "You're doing well here, Winifred, better than anyone expected." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a warm current through her body. "I'm trying," she replied softly. "More than trying," he corrected. "Succeeding." He mounted his horse with easy grace. "I'll be back tomorrow to check on things. Keep that colt handy, just in case." Winifred watched him ride away, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. In the short time since her arrival, Owen Anderson had become her protector, her teacher, her friend, and perhaps, whispered a voice in her heart, something more. The work party, the following Saturday, exceeded Winifred's expectations. By mid-morning, nearly 20 people had arrived at her ranch, bringing tools, supplies, and dishes of food to share. Men climbed ladders to repair the roof and chink the logs, while others cut and split firewood or mended fences. Women banked the foundation with earth and straw, cleaned the chimney, and prepared a feast on outdoor cooking fires. Winifred worked alongside them all, determined to pull her weight and learn the skills she would need in the coming years. The children from her school were there too, carrying water, stacking wood, and occasionally playing impromptu games in the yard. Throughout the day, she often found her gaze drawn to Owen. He directed the work efficiently, his natural leadership evident as people turned to him for guidance. Yet there was nothing domineering in his manner. He worked as hard as anyone, respected others' expertise, and maintained a quiet humor that kept spirits high despite the labor. By late afternoon, the work was largely complete, and the gathering transformed into a celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and music filled the air as people ate and visited. "Your neighbors approve of you," Abby commented, joining Winifred as she served coffee to the guests. "I've been hearing nothing but praise for the new school teacher who's brave enough to run her own ranch." Winifred blushed. "They're giving me far too much credit. Without Miguel and Raphael and your brother, I'd be lost." "Accepting help doesn't diminish your accomplishment," Abby pointed out. "Everyone needs help sometimes. The important thing is that you're willing to learn and work hard." She paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Speaking of my brother, he hasn't taken his eyes off you all day." Winifred's blush deepened. "Don't be ridiculous." "He's just concerned for my welfare, that's all." Abby snorted delicately. "If that's what you want to believe, I've known my brother all my life, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Winifred could formulate a response, Sheriff Harkins approached, plate in hand. "Miss Wheeler, I want to compliment you on your cooking. This apple cake is the finest I've tasted since leaving Virginia." "Thank you, Sheriff, though I can't take credit. The recipe is Mrs. Peterson's. She's been teaching me." As the sheriff moved on, Winifred caught sight of Owen across the yard. He was deep in conversation with Miguel, but as if sensing her gaze, he looked up and met her eyes. A smile spread across his face, warm, genuine, and with an intensity that made her breath catch. Maybe Abby wasn't so far off the mark after all. As dusk approached, families began to depart, leaving with warm handshakes and promises to visit again soon. By the time the last wagon pulled away, Winifred was exhausted but deeply content. "You've made a place for yourself here," Owen observed as they stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "In such a short time, too." "It doesn't feel short," Winifred replied. "So much has changed since I arrived. Sometimes I can hardly believe the woman I was in Boston and the woman I am now are the same person." "Are you happier now?" Owen asked quietly. Winifred considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "In Boston I was secure but unfulfilled. Here, despite all the challenges and hardships, I feel alive, as though I'm finally becoming the person I was meant to be." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The frontier changes people, strips away pretense, forces you to confront what truly matters." "And what truly matters to you, Owen Anderson?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider its boldness. His gaze intensified, fixing on her face in the gathering twilight. "Family, honor, working land that responds to care and effort." He paused. "And finding someone to share it all with." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. After a moment, Owen cleared his throat. "I should be going. It's getting dark." "Yes, of course," Winifred agreed quickly, suddenly flustered. "Thank you again for organizing today. I couldn't have managed the winter preparations alone." "You're welcome," Owen replied. He hesitated, then added, "I meant to tell you earlier I'll be gone for about a week. Need to drive some cattle to Durango for sale before the weather turns." Disappointment settled in Winifred's chest. "Oh, when do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning, first light." He shifted slightly. "Will you be all right? Abby will be here until I return, and Miguel is reliable." "I'll be fine," Winifred assured him, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The prospect of not seeing Owen for a week was strangely disheartening. "Safe travels." Owen nodded, his expression unreadable in the deepening shadows. Then, in a gesture that surprised them both, he reached out and briefly took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Take care, Winifred." Then he was gone, striding toward his horse, and Winifred was left on the porch with a racing heart and a growing realization that Owen Anderson had become far more important to her than she had been willing to admit. The week of Owen's absence dragged interminably. Though Winifred was busy with teaching and ranch chores, his presence had become such a fixture in her daily life that she felt off balance without their regular interactions. Abby stayed at the ranch as promised, but even her friendly companionship couldn't fill the void left by her brother. On the fourth day, as Winifred returned from town, she noticed a wagon pulled up outside her cabin. A well-dressed man in his 40s stood conversing with Miguel near the corral. "Miss Wheeler," Miguel called as she approached, "this gentleman has come to see you." The visitor turned, removing his hat to reveal salt and pepper hair and a carefully trimmed beard. "Miss Wheeler, I presume, Arnold Blackstone, at your service." His accent marked him as Eastern, perhaps from New York or Pennsylvania. "Mr. Blackstone," Winifred acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you to my ranch? Business, my dear lady. May we speak privately?" Curious and slightly wary, Winifred invited him into the cabin where Abby was preparing dinner. After introductions, Abby tactfully excused herself to gather eggs, leaving Winifred alone with the stranger. "I'll be direct, Miss Wheeler," Blackstone said once they were seated. "I represent a group of investors interested in purchasing land in this region for development. Your property is particularly desirable due to its water rights and proximity to town." Winifred stared at him, taken aback. "My ranch is not for sale, Mr. Blackstone." He smiled indulgently. "Everyone has their price, Miss Wheeler. My employers are prepared to offer a very generous sum, $5,000, more than enough for you to return east in comfort or establish yourself elsewhere." The amount was staggering more money than Winifred had ever imagined possessing. Yet the thought of selling Frederick's legacy, of leaving the community that had welcomed her, of never seeing Owen again. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackstone, but as I said, the ranch is not for sale." Blackstone's expression hardened slightly. "Miss Wheeler, forgive my bluntness, but you are a woman alone in a harsh territory. Winter is approaching. The practical challenges of maintaining a cattle operation without a husband or family to assist you are considerable." His condescending tone ignited a spark of indignation in Winifred. "I am hardly alone, Mr. Blackstone. I have capable employees and supportive neighbors, and while I may not have been raised to ranching, I am learning quickly." She stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have chores to attend to." Blackstone rose slowly, studying her with calculating eyes. "Very well, but I'll be in Aztec for another week, should you reconsider. $5,000 would solve many problems, Miss Wheeler." After seeing him out, Winifred sank into a chair, unsettled by the encounter. When Abby returned, she recounted the conversation. "Blackstone," Abby frowned. "I've heard that name. He's been approaching other ranchers too. The Mendozas refused him last month. Owen won't like this." "Owen has no say in what I do with my property," Winifred pointed out, though the thought of his reaction was foremost in her mind. Abby gave her a knowing look. "Perhaps not legally, but you can't tell me his opinion doesn't matter to you." Winifred couldn't deny it. "What would your brother do in my position?" "Owen values land above money," Abby said simply. "He believes that land, properly tended, provides security no bank note can match. But this isn't about what Owen would do, it's about what you want." What did she want? The question haunted Winifred through the evening and into the night. $5,000 represented freedom, security, opportunities she had never dared dream of in Boston. Yet the thought of leaving Aztec, of abandoning the life she was building here, filled her with an inexplicable sense of loss. And then there was Owen. In the short time she had known him, he had become integral to her sense of belonging in this place. His steady presence, his quiet strength, his belief in her ability to succeed all had taken root in her heart in ways she was only beginning to understand. By morning, Winifred had made her decision. She would not sell, not at any price. This land, this community, was her home now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them here. 2 days later, as Winifred was returning from school, she spotted a familiar figure riding toward her ranch from the north. Owen returned from Durango. Her heart leapt at the sight of him, and she urged her horse to a faster pace. They met at the edge of her property, pulling their mounts to a halt a few feet apart. "Welcome back," Winifred said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "How was your journey?" Owen's expression was serious, his normally clear eyes clouded with concern. "Productive enough. But I met some folks in Durango who told me about Blackstone and his operation. Abby says he came to see you." "He did," Winifred confirmed. He offered to buy the ranch. And Owen's voice was carefully neutral, but tension radiated from his posture. I declined, Winifred said simply. This is my home now. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, relief, and perhaps something deeper. I'm glad, he said quietly, but you should know Blackstone isn't the type to take rejection easily. He's known for applying pressure when simple offers are refused. A chill ran down Winifred's spine. What kind of pressure? Nothing overtly illegal, he's too clever for that. But accidents happen. Water sources get contaminated. Cattle break through fences mysteriously. Owen's jaw tightened. I should have been here when he came. I handled it, Winifred assured him, touched by his protective instinct but determined to stand her ground. And I'll handle whatever comes next. This is my land, my choice. Owen studied her for a long moment, admiration gradually replacing concern in his expression. You've changed since you arrived, Winifred Wheeler, grown stronger. I had good teachers, she replied, holding his gaze. A slow smile spread across Owen's face. Let's get you home. I expect Abby's cooking up something special to welcome me back. As they rode side by side toward the cabin, Winifred felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever Blackstone might attempt, whatever challenges winter might bring, she was where she belonged. And with Owen beside her, she felt equal to any task that lay ahead. The next morning brought the season's first frost, coating the landscape in a delicate white sheen that glittered in the early sunlight. Winifred rose before dawn, donning the warm woolen dress and sturdy boots that had replaced her Eastern attire. As she stepped onto the porch, steaming coffee cup in hand, the sight of her frosted property filled her with a quiet pride. In just a few weeks, this land had become hers in more than just legal terms. She had put her sweat and tears into it, learned its contours and needs, begun to understand its rhythms. Miguel approached from his cabin, breath forming clouds in the cold air. Buenos dias, Senora Wheeler. A cold one today. Good morning, Miguel. Yes, winter is announcing itself. The cattle will need extra feed with this cold, and we should check the North Creek. It may have ice forming. Winifred nodded. I'll ride out with you after breakfast. Inside, Abby was preparing a hearty meal of oatmeal and biscuits. Owen's coming by later, she announced as Winifred entered. Says he wants to show you something. Curious but not pressing for details, Winifred sat down to eat. After breakfast, she and Miguel rode out to check on the cattle and water sources, returning mid-morning to find Owen waiting at the cabin, a large bundle tied to his saddle. Morning, he greeted them, dismounting. Miguel, how are the cattle handling the frost? Well enough, Senor Anderson. Moving them to the south pasture tomorrow, more shelter there. Owen nodded approvingly, then turned to Winifred. Got something for you. Been working on it evenings while I was in Durango. He untied the bundle and carefully unfolded what appeared to be a large leather coat lined with sheepskin. Winter gear, he explained, holding it up. Made it from hides I tanned last spring. Thought you could use something warmer than those Eastern clothes. Winifred touched the coat reverently, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the skill evident in its construction. You made this. My mother taught me leatherwork when I was young, Owen explained, a touch of self-consciousness in his manner. Said a man should know how to provide for his family's needs. It's beautiful, Winifred said sincerely. She slipped it on, finding it heavy but wonderfully warm. Though large on her frame, it would provide excellent protection against the winter winds. Thank you, Owen, I'll treasure it. A pleased expression crossed his face. There's more, he admitted, producing a pair of gloves and a fur hat from his saddlebag. Complete set. Abby, watching from the porch, caught Winifred's eye with a knowing smile that made her blush slightly. Owen's gift was practical, certainly, but the care and time invested in creating it spoke of deeper feelings than mere neighborly concern. "Now you'll be properly outfitted for winter," Owen said, apparently oblivious to the women's silent exchange. "Which is good timing, because I came to invite you both to a barn raising at the Peterson place this Saturday. Their old one collapsed in that windstorm last month." "Of course we'll come," Winifred agreed immediately. Community gatherings had become highlights in her new life, chances to strengthen bonds with her neighbors and learn more about frontier customs. "Good," Owen nodded. "Now, I noticed your north fence is still weak in spots. Thought I'd take a look while I'm here, if that's agreeable." As he and Miguel set off to inspect the fence, Abby joined Winifred on the porch. "My brother doesn't make gifts for just anyone," she observed casually. "That coat represents weeks of work." "He's been very kind to me since I arrived," Winifred replied, deliberately neutral. Abby snorted softly. "Winifred Wheeler, you are either blind or stubborn. My brother is sweet on you has been since the day you stepped off that stagecoach." The directness of the statement left Winifred momentarily speechless. "He hardly knew me then," she finally protested. "Sometimes you just know," Abby shrugged. "Owen's always been like that, decisive, trusting his instincts, and his instincts have drawn him to you." She paused, expression growing serious. "The question is, how do you feel about him?" How did she feel about Owen Anderson? The question had been circling in Winifred's mind with increasing frequency. She admired him, certainly, respected his capabilities and character, enjoyed his company more than anyone else's, thought of him when he was absent, but was it love? "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Everything has happened so quickly. 3 months ago I was preparing to marry a man I'd never met. Now I'm a rancher in New Mexico territory. My feelings are complicated." Abby nodded understandingly. "Fair enough, but don't keep him waiting too long for an answer. Good men like my brother are rare out here." The barn raising on Saturday proved to be the largest community gathering Winifred had yet attended in Aztec. Nearly 50 people came from surrounding ranches and farms, as well as from town. Men brought tools and lumber, women brought food, and children ran excitedly underfoot, turning work into a celebration. The process fascinated Winifred how under Owen's and a few other experienced men's direction, the frame of a substantial barn rose from nothing in a single day. Teams worked in coordinated effort, raising massive beams, securing joints, laying flooring. By mid-afternoon, the skeleton of the structure stood complete, and work began on the walls and roof. Winifred helped where she could, mainly with the women preparing and serving food to keep the workers' strength up. Throughout the day, she found herself watching Owen. He moved with confidence among the men, respected for his skill and judgment. Several times, he caught her looking and smiled, a warm, private expression that made her heart flutter. As evening approached and work wound down, tables were set up in the Petersons' yard for a communal supper. Lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering as people celebrated their accomplishment. After the meal, someone produced a fiddle, and others brought out harmonicas and a small accordion. A space was cleared for dancing, and couples began to form. Winifred stood watching, clapping in time to the lively tune when Owen appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Miss Wheeler?" he asked formally, though his eyes held a teasing light. "I don't know these dances," she admitted. "Then I'll teach you," he replied, taking her hand and leading her into the circle of dancers. The dance was a simple reel, with couples moving in patterns around each other. Owen guided her with gentle pressure on her waist and hand, his touch sending warmth through her despite the cool evening air. "You're a natural," he commented as she quickly caught the rhythm. "I had a good teacher," Winifred replied, echoing her words from their ride days earlier. Owen's expression softened. "Winifred," he began, then hesitated as the dance separated them momentarily. When they came together again, he tried once more. "There's something I've been wanting to say." A commotion at the edge of the gathering interrupted him. Sheriff Harkins was approaching rapidly, his expression grave. "Anderson," he called, "need to speak with you. And you too, Miss Wheeler." The music faltered and stopped as people sensed trouble. Owen and Winifred moved to meet the sheriff, concern evident on both their faces. "What is it, Sheriff?" Owen asked. "Just got word from a traveler coming through from the south," Harkins said grimly. "Carson brothers were spotted near Bloomfield yesterday, moving this way. And there's more, they were seen talking to Blackstone at the hotel there." Murmurs spread through the crowd as people overheard. The Carson brothers' reputation was well known in the territory, ruthless cattle rustlers who didn't hesitate to use violence. "You think Blackstone hired them?" Owen's voice was low, anger simmering beneath his controlled tone. "Can't prove it," the sheriff replied, "but the timing's mighty suspicious, especially given his interest in certain properties." He glanced meaningfully at Winifred, fear coiled in Winifred's stomach. "My ranch, possibly," Harkins nodded, "and others who have refused to sell. I'm organizing a watch rotation, but we're spread thin. Thought you should know, especially with your place being somewhat isolated." "I'll stay at Miss Wheeler's tonight," Owen said immediately, "and we'll need to warn Miguel." The festive atmosphere of the evening had evaporated. People began gathering their families, preparing to return to their homes and secure their properties. As Owen helped Winifred into his wagon for the ride back to her ranch, she was acutely aware of how vulnerable she might be. Despite her growing confidence and skills, the prospect of facing armed outlaws was terrifying. "I won't let anything happen to you or your property," Owen promised quietly as they drove through the darkness. "But we need to be prepared." Winifred nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. "What should we do? First, we gather anything valuable inside the cabin. Then we make sure all weapons are loaded and accessible. I'll sleep in the main room, keep watch through the night." "Do you really think they'll come?" Winifred asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Owen's expression was grim in the moonlight. "I don't know. But the Carsons don't make idle threats, and if Blackstone is involved, well, he wants your land badly enough to pay $5,000 for it. Might be willing to pay the Carsons considerably less to scare you into selling." The thought that her refusal had potentially put herself and others in danger weighed heavily on Winifred. "Perhaps I should have accepted his offer," she said softly. Owen's head turned sharply toward her. "Don't think that way. A man like Blackstone would push people off their land all across the territory if no one stood against him. You have every right to keep what's yours." His conviction strengthened her resolve. "You're right. This is my home now, and I won't be frightened away from it." They reached the ranch to find Miguel already alert to potential danger. He had moved his bedroll into the barn to keep watch over the horses and equipment stored there. "Rafael is coming at first light with his brothers," Miguel reported. "They will help us patrol the boundaries." Grateful for the loyalty of her employees and neighbors, Winifred helped Owen secure the cabin. They filled water barrels in case they were confined inside, moved valuables to less visible locations, and checked that all weapons were in working order. As midnight approached, Abby retired to the bedroom she shared with Winifred, while Owen made a final circuit of the property before settling on a pallet near the front door, rifle within easy reach. Unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Winifred sat in the rocking chair near the fire, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. "You should rest," Owen advised gently. Tomorrow may be a long day. I can't, she admitted. My mind won't quiet. Owen studied her in the firelight, his expression thoughtful. Tell me about Boston, he suggested. What was your life like there? Grateful for the distraction, Winifred began to speak of her childhood, her parents, the small school where she had taught. As she spoke, Owen listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed his genuine interest in understanding her past. In turn, he shared stories of his youth coming west with his family, the challenges of establishing their ranch, the loss of his parents, and his determination to make their dream succeed. They would be proud of you, Winifred said sincerely. Of the man you've become, the neighbor and friend you are to so many. Owen's eyes held hers across the dimly lit room. And what am I to you, Winifred? The directness of the question took her breath away. In the quiet of the night, with danger potentially lurking outside, pretense seemed pointless. You're the person I trust most in the world, she answered honestly. The one whose opinion matters to me, whose presence brings me comfort, whose absence leaves me diminished somehow. Owen rose from his pallet and crossed to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words, he said, his voice low and earnest. But maybe there are no perfect words for this. Winifred Wheeler, I love you. I think I've loved you since I first saw you standing brave and bewildered at the stagecoach station. Joy bloomed in Winifred's chest, sudden and overwhelming. Owen, a shot rang out in the distance, cutting her response short. Owen was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Someone's at the north fence line, he said grimly, reaching for his rifle. Stay inside, bar the door after me. No, Winifred protested, grabbing her own gun. I'm not hiding while you face danger alone. Before Owen could argue, Miguel appeared at the window, breathing hard. Riders coming, he reported. 5, maybe 6. They shot at Raphael when he challenged them. Is he hurt? Winifred asked anxiously. No, Senora, he is bringing his brothers from town, but they will not arrive in time. Owen's face was set in determined lines as he handed Winifred extra ammunition. Stay in the cabin, he instructed firmly. Miguel and I will try to hold them off until help comes. The fear in Winifred's heart was overshadowed by a fierce protectiveness for her home and the people defending it. This is my ranch, she said with quiet intensity. I will defend it alongside you. Something like pride flickered in Owen's eyes. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Stay low and behind cover. If I tell you to get inside, you go immediately. Understood? Understood. They positioned themselves strategically, Owen behind the large oak at the corner of the cabin, Miguel near the barn, and Winifred on the porch behind a stack of firewood. The night was clear, moonlight providing enough visibility to see approaching riders. They didn't have to wait long. 6 men appeared at the edge of the clearing, advancing slowly toward the cabin. In the lead was a tall figure. Winifred recognized Arnold Blackstone himself. Miss Wheeler, he called when they were about 50 yards away. I've come to discuss my offer again. Perhaps you'll reconsider in light of recent developments. Your offer was refused, Mr. Blackstone, Winifred replied steadily. And trespassing with armed men is hardly a way to change my mind. Blackstone laughed coldly. These gentlemen are merely protection in these dangerous times. The Carson brothers have been terrorizing ranches in the area, I hear. Terrible business. A woman alone would be particularly vulnerable. She's not alone. Owen's voice rang out as he stepped partially into view, rifle aimed. And she's not interested in selling. I suggest you leave while you still can, Blackstone. Tension crackled in the air as the two groups faced each other across the yard. Winifred's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady on her revolver. Anderson, Blackstone acknowledged. always interfering in other people's business. Miss Wheeler is quite capable of making her own decisions, I'm sure. You're right about that, Winifred agreed, rising to stand in full view on the porch. And I've decided that you and your hired thugs need to leave my property immediately. One of the men with Blackstone, a lean, hard-faced individual with a puckered scar across his cheek, spurred his horse forward slightly. This is getting tiresome, Blackstone. You said the woman would be alone, easy to intimidate. Patience, Carson, Blackstone muttered, but loud enough to be heard in the still night. The admission that Blackstone had indeed hired the notorious outlaws was all the confirmation Owen needed. You're trespassing and threatening a landowner, he called. That's enough to see you in jail, Blackstone. If anyone lives to testify, Carson retorted, raising his rifle. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Carson fired toward Owen, the shot splintering the tree beside him. Owen returned fire as Winifred and Miguel also began shooting. The night erupted in gunfire and shouting. Winifred's training proved its worth as she fired carefully, deliberately, forcing the intruders to scatter for cover. She saw one man fall from his horse, clutching his leg, while another retreated rapidly toward the tree line. Blackstone, evidently not expecting such resistance, was trying to control his panicking horse while shouting at the Carson brothers to press forward. The standoff might have ended in tragedy had fate not intervened. From the direction of town came the sound of multiple riders approaching at speed. Raphael returning with reinforcements, including Sheriff Harkins and several armed townsmen. Seeing that the odds had shifted decisively against them, the remaining attackers turned to flee. Carson fired a parting shot that struck dangerously close to where Winifred stood, forcing her to duck behind the woodpile. Owen, seeing the near miss, abandoned his position to race to her side. "Are you hit?" he demanded, fear evident in his voice as he reached for her. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her heart was racing from the close call. By the time Sheriff Harkins and the others arrived, Blackstone and his hired guns had vanished into the night, leaving behind one wounded man and enough evidence of their attack to warrant pursuit. "We'll track them at first light," Harkins promised. "Attacking a homestead with intent to intimidate that's serious charges, and hiring known outlaws adds to it." As the excitement died down and plans were made for guarding the property through the remaining hours of darkness, Winifred found herself standing beside Owen at the edge of the yard, both of them still keyed up from the confrontation. "You were brave tonight," he said quietly. "Braver than you should have had to be." "As were you," she replied, suddenly remembering their interrupted conversation before the attack. "Owen, about what you said earlier." He turned to face her fully, moonlight silvering his features. "I meant every word, Winifred. I love you. Tonight only confirmed what I already knew, that you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Winifred stepped closer, her heart full to bursting with emotions too powerful to contain. "I love you too, Owen Anderson. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you offered your protection to a stranger in need." Owen's arms encircled her, drawing her against his chest. "Then marry me," he said simply. "Let's build a life together here on your land or on mine, or somewhere new if you prefer. Just be my wife, my partner in whatever comes." "Yes," Winifred whispered, raising her face to his. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their first kiss was gentle yet filled with promise of passion, of partnership, of a future forged together in this wild, beautiful land that had become home to them both. When they finally parted, Owen kept her close in the circle of his arms. "When Frederick Thompson died, I thought it a tragedy," he said softly. "Now I see it was also a beginning, the start of our story." "A story I'm grateful to be part of," Winifred replied, laying her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. The following weeks brought significant changes to Winifred's life. Sheriff Harkins and a posse tracked Blackstone and the Carson brothers to the territorial border, where a shootout left 2 of the outlaws dead and Blackstone wounded and under arrest. The threat to her ranch eliminated, Winifred could focus on winter preparations and her future with Owen. They agreed to marry before the worst of winter set in, giving them time to decide where they would make their permanent home. Both ranches had advantages. Frederick's place was smaller but had better water access, while Owen's was larger with superior grazing land. What if we combined them? Winifred suggested one evening as they sat planning their future. Your ranch to the west, mine to the east, together they would make one substantial property. Owen considered the idea thoughtfully. It could work. We'd need to build a connecting road, perhaps a new house centrally located. It would mean a larger operation than I've managed before, but with Miguel's help and perhaps another hand or two. And I could continue teaching, Winifred added. The town council has approved funds for a proper schoolhouse in the spring. Their wedding took place on a crisp November day, with the entire community gathering to celebrate. The ceremony was held in Aztec's small church, followed by a feast and dancing at Owen's ranch. Abby, serving as Winifred's attendant, had wept openly as her brother and new sister-in-law exchanged vows. I knew from the start you 2 were meant for each other, she declared during the celebration afterward. From the moment, Owen volunteered to help the pretty stranger from the stagecoach. The newlyweds spent their first night as husband and wife in Winifred's cabin, which now felt truly like home with Owen's presence. As they lay together in the quiet darkness, Owen traced gentle fingers along his wife's cheek. Happy, he murmured. Completely, Winifred assured him, still marveling at the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. Though I can't help thinking of Frederick Thompson occasionally, I hope he would approve of how things have turned out. He would, Owen said confidently. He wanted his land cared for and his bride happy. Both wishes have been fulfilled, just not quite in the way he imagined. Winter descended on New Mexico territory with its customary severity, but Winifred faced it without fear. The combined resources of both ranches, plus Owen's experience and the community's support, ensured they weathered the cold months in comfort and security. By spring, they had begun work on a new house situated between the 2 original ranches, a larger structure designed to accommodate the family they hoped to build together. Winifred continued teaching at the newly constructed schoolhouse in Aztec, riding into town 3 days a week while maintaining her role in ranch operations. Their life together settled into a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. Each brought strengths to their partnership, Owen's practical knowledge of ranching balanced by Winifred's organizational skills and education. Together, they created a home that became known throughout the county for its hospitality and prosperity. 1 year to the day after Winifred's arrival in Aztec, she and Owen sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in comfortable intimacy. "A penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Anderson," Owen said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Winifred smiled, placing a hand over her slightly rounded belly where their first child was growing. "I was thinking about how life can change so completely in such a short time. A year ago today, I stepped off that stagecoach expecting to meet Frederick Thompson, having no idea what the future truly held. You ever regret it? Coming west, staying even when things seemed bleakest?" "Not for a moment," Winifred replied without hesitation. Every step of the journey led me here to you, to this life we're building together. How could I regret that? Owen's hand covered hers where it rested on her stomach. Our child will grow up knowing both their parents chose this life, this land, each other. And knowing the story of how their mother came west as a mail-order bride, only to find her groom had died and the cowboy next door offered his protection. Winifred added with a smile. A protection that became something much more, Owen finished, drawing her closer as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the land they both loved, their past honored, and their future bright with promise. The mail-order bride had found her true destiny, not in the arrangement that brought her west, but in the unexpected love that had given her the courage to stay. 5 years passed, bringing changes and growth to the Anderson ranch and family. Winifred and Owen welcomed their first child, a son they named James Frederick, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth. The children thrived in the frontier environment, growing strong and independent under their parents' loving guidance. The combined ranch operations prospered beyond their initial expectations. Owen's natural aptitude for animal husbandry, coupled with Winifred's head for figures, resulted in steady expansion of their cattle herd and increased profits each year. They reinvested much of their earnings in improvements, better breeding stock, additional acreage when neighboring parcels became available, and modern equipment that made their work more efficient. Winifred continued teaching at the Aztec school until Elizabeth's birth, when she reluctantly resigned her position to focus on her growing family and ranch responsibilities. However, her influence on education in the region didn't diminish. She established a small library in town, donating books and organizing reading circles for adults and children alike. The community around them flourished as well. Aztec grew from a dusty frontier outpost to a respectable small town with a proper main street, several businesses, and even a small hotel. The arrival of the narrow-gauge railroad in 1881 connected the isolated region to larger markets, bringing new opportunities and prosperity. Through it all, Owen and Winifred's partnership deepened, their love maturing like a fine wine, growing richer and more complex with time. They faced challenges together: drought seasons, economic downturns, the ordinary difficulties of raising children and managing a large enterprise, but their foundation remained unshaken. On a warm summer evening in 1884, as they sat on the porch watching 7-year-old James and 5-year-old Elizabeth playing in the yard, Owen reflected on their journey. "I was thinking about Frederick Thompson today," he said, surprising Winifred with the unexpected topic. "How strange life is, how one man's tragedy became our beginning." Winifred nodded thoughtfully. "I still visit his grave sometimes when I'm in town. I feel I owe him a debt, though we never met. In a way, we're living his dream," Owen observed. A thriving ranch, a family growing up on this land, just not the family he envisioned. "I think he would be pleased," Winifred said softly. "The land is well tended, productive. His legacy continues, just in a different form than he planned." They fell silent, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. James had Owen's height and quiet strength, while Elizabeth possessed her mother's intelligence and determination. Both children embodied the best of their parents, East and West combined in a new generation. "Mama." "Papa, look what I caught." Elizabeth raced toward them, carefully cupping a glowing firefly between her small hands. "Gentle now," Winifred cautioned as the little girl opened her fingers slightly to show her prize. "Living creatures need to be free." After admiring the insect, Elizabeth released it back into the twilight air, watching in delight as it flew to join its companions twinkling across the yard. As darkness fell completely, Owen lit the lanterns while Winifred called the children in for their baths and bedtime stories. The nightly ritual was precious to her, this time of closeness with her family, of passing on knowledge and values through tales both imagined and real. Tonight, as she tucked the children into their beds, James made a request that touched her deeply. "Tell us again how you and Papa met," he pleaded, his blue eyes so like his father's wide with anticipation, though he'd heard the story many times before. Elizabeth immediately joined in the plea. "Yes, the stagecoach story, when you came to marry another man but found Papa instead." Winifred smiled, settling herself on the edge of the bed. "Well, it was a warm September day in 1874, and I had traveled all the way from Boston." As she recounted their beginning her arrival, the devastating news of Frederick's death, Owen's timely offer of assistance, she was struck anew by the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment, this family, this life of purpose and love. Later, with the children asleep, she joined Owen in their bedroom. He was standing at the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of their ranch. "The children requested the stagecoach story again," she told him, moving to stand beside him. Owen smiled, wrapping an arm around her waist. "It's a good story. Adventure, tragedy, romance, all the elements needed to capture a child's imagination. And the best part is that it ends happily," Winifred said, leaning into his embrace. "Not ends," Owen corrected gently. "Continues. Every day we're still writing our story, Winnie." The nickname, used only in their most private moments, still had the power to warm her heart after all these years. She turned in his arms to face him, studying the beloved features that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the touch of silver now appearing at his temples, the steady gaze that had never lost its ability to make her pulse quicken. "I love you, Owen Anderson," she said simply. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." His response was to draw her closer, his kiss conveying what words alone could not: the depth of his devotion, the joy he found in their shared life, the passion that remained undiminished by time or familiarity. Outside their window, the vast New Mexico sky sparkled with stars, silent witnesses to the love that had blossomed in this wild, beautiful land, a love born of kindness, nurtured by respect, and strengthened through partnership in all things. The mail-order bride who had arrived to find her groom dead had instead discovered her true destiny in the arms of the cowboy next door who had offered his protection and, ultimately, his heart. Their story, like the land they cherished, continued to unfold season after season, year after year, a testament to the unexpected paths love sometimes takes and the courage required to follow where it leads.